You won't believe how my best friend's mom changed my life in one night. It started with a sauna invite during a snowstorm, innocent enough, right? But the moment she walked in, her robe slipping just enough to leave me speechless, everything spiraled out of control. What happened next was electrifying, forbidden, and completely unforgettable. I knew it was wrong, but I could not stop. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends, because it still keeps me up at night. The snowstorm was brutal, the kind of chaos that turns the familiar into a frozen labyrinth. I trudged through the biting wind, my face stinging with the sharpness of each gust. Every step crunched against the snow-covered ground until finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw it, Alex's house. A haven of warmth in the frozen expanse, its windows glowed like a beacon through the storm. Alex opened the door before I could even knock. His grin was wide, almost mischievous. "You made it, Noah," he exclaimed, pulling me inside. The wave of heat that hit me was blissful, erasing the ice from my limbs. I shook the snow off my boots and let out a breathless laugh. Barely. I thought I was going to freeze solid out there. "You picked the perfect night to come over," Alex said, slapping me on the back. "Guess what we just got installed?" Before I could even venture a guess, he answered, "A sauna. My dad has been talking about it non-stop. You have to try it. It is incredible." A sauna on a night like this sounded perfect. The thought of warmth penetrating every frozen fiber of my being was irresistible. "I am in," I said without hesitation. Alex hurriedly threw on his coat. "That is what I thought. But here is the thing, my dad asked me to grab some supplies before the store closes. It will only take a bit. In the meantime, my mom can show you how to use it. She is way better at explaining stuff like this." Before I could protest, Alex was already halfway out the door. "Do not wait, go warm up," he called as he disappeared into the snow. Left alone, I took in the quiet comfort of the house. The snow outside muffled the world, leaving nothing but the soft hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the wooden beams. It was peaceful, too peaceful. Then came the soft sound of footsteps. Turning, I saw her, Elaine, Alex's mom. She stepped into the room wearing a pale robe, tied loosely at the waist. Her dark hair was casually pinned up, with a few strands framing her face. "Alex said you wanted to try the sauna," she said, her voice warm and inviting. "Yeah," I replied, suddenly feeling the need to clear my throat. He made it sound like heaven. She smiled. "Come on, I will get it ready for you." Elaine led me down the hall to the sauna, which was tucked away in a quiet corner of the house. When she opened the door, a wave of heat and the scent of cedar greeted me. Inside, the wood-paneled walls glowed warmly, and a stone heater radiated steady warmth. Elaine stepped in, her movements fluid as she showed me the controls. "You adjust the temperature here," she explained, her fingers brushing the dials. "And you can add water to the rocks for more steam, just do not overdo it." I nodded, absorbing her every word. There was an easy confidence about her, a way she moved that held my attention more than I cared to admit. When she turned to leave, I caught myself staring. "Enjoy," she said with a soft smile, her voice lingering in the air as she disappeared down the hall. I sat on the bench, letting the warmth seep into my skin. Every tense muscle began to relax. The cold, the storm, even Alex, all of it faded into the background. For a moment, it was just me and the soothing heat. But then the door opened again. Elaine stepped in, the steam swirling around her like a veil. She closed the door softly behind her, her robe shifting slightly as she sat across from me. Her presence transformed the space, turning the sauna from a refuge into something far more charged. "It is easier to relax with company," she said, her voice soft, almost hypnotic. And that was when everything began to change. Elaine leaned back against the wooden wall, the faint glow of the sauna light tracing the contours of her face. Her robe shifted slightly as she settled in, revealing the delicate line of her collarbone. I felt a lump form in my throat, and suddenly, the heat of the sauna felt suffocating. "You seem tense," she said, her voice a mix of amusement and concern. "Is the heat too much?" I shook my head, avoiding her gaze. "No, I am fine. Just getting used to it." Her lips curved into a faint smile. It is all right to relax, Noah. That is the whole point. She reached for the ladle and poured a small amount of water over the hot stones. The hiss of steam filled the room, the air thickening as a fresh wave of heat enveloped us. Elaine sat back, her movements slow and deliberate. The tie of her robe loosened slightly, but she made no move to adjust it. Instead, she let the moment linger. Sometimes, it helps to share the heat, she said, her tone light but layered with something I could not quite place. I swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. My mind raced, trying to focus on anything other than the growing tension in the room. The sauna's warmth, which had been comforting just moments ago, now felt overwhelming. Every breath I took seemed to carry the faint scent of her perfume, mingling with the cedar and steam. She leaned forward slightly, her hand brushing mine. The touch was light, almost incidental, but it sent a jolt through me. I glanced at her, and her eyes met mine, steady and unreadable. You seem distracted, she said, her voice softer now. Is something on your mind? I froze, caught between the urge to say anything, and the fear of what might happen if I did. She tilted her head, studying me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. You can tell me, she said, leaning closer. Her robe slipped further, exposing her shoulder, damp with sweat that glistened in the dim light. My heart pounded in my chest. I knew I should look away, step out, say something that would break whatever was happening. But I stayed frozen, caught in the pull of her presence. Relax, she whispered, her tone almost hypnotic. You are allowed to enjoy this. Her hand brushed against mine again, this time lingering. The air between us felt charged, electric. Every rational thought in my head screamed for me to stop, to put distance between us, but her gaze held me in place. Then she spoke again, her voice so soft I barely heard it over the hiss of the steam. Do you want me to leave? Her question hung in the air, the space between us impossibly thick with unspoken possibilities. My pulse raced as I tried to find the words, but nothing came. Instead, I shook my head, slowly, deliberately. No, I said, my voice barely audible. A small smile played on her lips. It was not mischievous or coy, it was knowing. Without another word, she shifted closer, her hand resting lightly on my arm. Her touch was warm, almost burning against my skin. And then, before I could second-guess myself, her lips brushed mine. It was tentative at first, a testing of boundaries that no longer seemed to exist. But the connection was instant, electric. The kiss deepened quickly, her hands moving to the back of my neck as she pulled me closer. The heat of her body against mine made the sauna's warmth pale in comparison. My hands found her waist, tentative at first, then more confident as her robe slipped further. Her skin was warm and smooth under my fingers, and the tension between us finally snapped. Every touch, every kiss was fueled by an urgency that blurred the lines of right and wrong. The steam curled around us like a shroud, hiding us from the rest of the world. For those moments, nothing else mattered but her, the way she felt, the way she moved, the way her breath hitched when I touched her. But then, just as the world seemed to fade completely, the sharp sound of a door slamming echoed from somewhere in the house. Elaine froze, her body tensing against mine. Her eyes snapped open, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of panic cross her face. She pulled back quickly, her hands trembling as she adjusted her robe. Stay quiet, she whispered, her voice urgent and low. The sound of footsteps grew louder, moving through the house. My heart pounded in my chest as I held my breath, every muscle in my body frozen. The footsteps passed, fading into the distance, and Elaine let out a slow, shaky breath. That was too close, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced at me, her expression a mix of regret and something else, something unspoken but undeniable. We cannot do this, she said finally, though her voice lacked conviction. She stood, smoothing her robe and running a hand through her damp hair. But as she moved toward the door, I reached out, grabbing her wrist gently. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, the air between us thickened again. Do you want to stop? I asked, my voice low but steady. She hesitated, her gaze locked on mine. Then, slowly, a small smile crept across her lips. Just one more time, she whispered, her voice barely audible. She let her robe fall to the floor as she stepped closer, her movements slow and deliberate. The storm outside raged on, but inside that sauna, the only thing that existed was her. Elaine closed the gap between us, her hands finding their way to my chest. The robe that had barely clung to her frame now lay forgotten on the floor, and the heat between us became unbearable, searing, overwhelming. She straddled me, her skin glistening with sweat as her fingers traced patterns on my shoulders. "You drive me crazy," she murmured, her lips hovering close to mine. Her words ignited something primal in me, and I pulled her closer, my hands exploring every curve of her body. The sound of the steam hissing on the stones mixed with the rhythm of our breaths, creating a soundtrack that drowned out the rest of the world. Every touch, every kiss carried an urgency as if this moment might be our last. Her head tilted back, exposing the curve of her neck, and I trailed kisses along her skin, eliciting soft gasps that made my pulse race even faster. Her hair clung to her damp skin, framing her flushed face as her hands tangled in my hair. The lines of what was acceptable had long since disappeared, and neither of us seemed inclined to find them again. But then, a sound shattered the intimate cocoon we had created. The front door slammed shut, and a voice echoed through the house. "Mom? Noah? I am back." Alex called, his voice casual and unsuspecting. Elaine stiffened in my arms, her body going rigid. Her eyes widened in panic as the gravity of the situation came crashing down on us. She scrambled off me, grabbing her robe and hastily wrapping it around herself. Her breathing was heavy and uneven as she peeked out of the sauna door, her movements quick and frantic. "It is Alex," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. The sound of footsteps grew louder, heading down the hall. Elaine turned to me, her expression a mixture of regret and urgency. "Get dressed. Now." I fumbled for my clothes, my hands trembling as the adrenaline coursed through me. The heat of the sauna now felt suffocating, and every breath I took seemed to carry the weight of what we had just done. Elaine adjusted her robe, smoothing her hair and composing herself with practiced ease. The door opened, and Alex's face appeared, his expression full of casual cheer. "Hey! How was it? Pretty amazing, right?" I forced a smile, my heart still pounding. "Yeah," I said, my voice strained. "It was definitely unforgettable." Alex grinned, oblivious to the tension in the room. "Told you. Nothing beats a sauna on a night like this." Elaine slipped past us, her movements graceful but quick. "I was just showing him how everything works," she said smoothly, her tone calm and collected. "You should try it, Alex. It is perfect after being out in the cold." "Thanks, Mom," Alex said, completely unaware of the storm that had just raged within those sauna walls. Elaine disappeared down the hall, leaving me alone with Alex. He continued talking, his words a blur as my mind raced with everything that had just happened. The weight of it all, what we had done, what we had risked, pressed down on me, suffocating and impossible to ignore. But even as guilt began to creep in, a part of me could not forget the way her lips felt on mine, the way her touch had set my skin on fire. The storm outside continued to howl, but the real chaos was within me, and I knew it was far from over. Because some moments change everything, and no matter how hard you try, you cannot go back to the way things were. The rest of the evening unfolded like a performance, each of us playing our roles as if nothing had happened. Alex and I settled in the living room, the storm outside raging harder than ever. He talked animatedly about his plans for the weekend, about how the sauna was a game changer. I nodded along, my responses clipped and automatic, my mind elsewhere. Elaine reappeared a few minutes later, carrying a tray of steaming mugs. She set them down on the coffee table, her movements smooth and practiced, as though nothing was out of the ordinary. Her gaze flickered to me briefly, her expression unreadable, but I felt the weight of that moment in the sauna pressing down on both of us. As the night dragged on, I found myself unable to escape the memories of her, the way her skin had felt beneath my hands, the way her voice had softened into whispers, the heat of her body against mine. The guilt gnawed me, but it was drowned out by the memory of her lips, her touch, her scent. When Alex finally excused himself to take a call from his girlfriend, I was left alone with Elaine. The air between us felt charged, heavy with everything unsaid. She busied herself tidying the kitchen, but the tension was undeniable. Every glance, every fleeting touch as we passed each other in the narrow space, felt like a spark waiting to ignite. I found myself standing at the edge of the kitchen, watching her as she rinsed a glass. The sound of running water and the soft clink of dishes seemed deafening in the silence. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes meeting mine for a fraction of a second before she turned back to the sink. "Are you all right?" she asked, her tone casual but her voice just low enough to carry a hidden edge. "I do not know," I admitted, my voice quiet. "What happened earlier?" She turned to face me, drying her hands on a towel. "What happened earlier," she interrupted, "should stay between us. It has to." Her words were firm, but her gaze lingered, and I could see the same conflict in her eyes that I felt in my chest. She took a step closer, the tension between us tightening like a string pulled taut. "We cannot let this go any further," she said softly, but her tone wavered. "Then why does it feel like it already has?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, we stood there, the storm outside a distant roar. She reached up, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Her hands trembled slightly, and I caught the faintest hint of vulnerability beneath her composed exterior. "I am sorry," she whispered, but before I could respond, the sound of Alex's footsteps echoed down the hall. Elaine stepped back, her expression smoothing into one of perfect calm as he re-entered the room. "Sorry about that," Alex said, flopping onto the couch. "What did I miss?" "Nothing important," Elaine replied, her voice light and natural. But as Alex launched into another story, I caught her glance from the corner of my eye. It was fleeting, but it held a silent promise, a dangerous one that neither of us dared to acknowledge. As the evening wound down and the storm outside began to ease, Alex offered to let me crash in the guest room for the night. I hesitated, knowing staying any longer was a risk, but the idea of venturing back out into the freezing cold felt impossible. "Yeah, sure. Thanks," I said finally, trying to sound casual. Elaine excused herself shortly after, bidding us goodnight with a warm smile. But as she disappeared down the hallway, I felt the weight of her presence linger, like an unspoken invitation. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, the memories of the day playing over and over in my mind. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of wood settling and the soft whistle of wine through the eaves. Then, just as I began to drift into an uneasy sleep, there was a faint knock at my door. My heart stopped. The knock was soft, barely audible, but it might as well have been thunder in the silence of the house. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, staring at the shadow under the door. My mind raced. Was it Alex? Had he seen something earlier? Or was it her? Another knock. Slightly louder this time. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, the floor cold beneath my bare feet. Slowly, I made my way to the door, every step feeling heavier than the last. My hand hovered over the doorknob for a moment before I finally turned it, pulling the door open just enough to see her standing there. Elaine. She was wrapped in a long sweater, her hair loose and tumbling over her shoulders. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes, those eyes, burned with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. She glanced over her shoulder, checking the hallway, before slipping inside and closing the door behind her. "You should not be here," I whispered, though my voice betrayed more hesitation than conviction. "I know," she replied, her voice barely audible. "But I could not stop thinking about it, about you." Her words hit me like a freight train. I should have told her to leave, should have created the distance that we both desperately needed. But instead, I stood there, rooted to the spot, as she took a step closer. "This is wrong," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, they felt hollow. My body betrayed me, leaning ever so slightly into her proximity. "Then tell me to go," she said softly, her eyes searching mine. "Say the words, and I will leave." I opened my mouth, but no sound came. Her presence was magnetic, and the pull between us was undeniable. She took another step closer, her hand brushing against mine, and I felt my resolve crumble. "That is what I thought," she said, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. Before I could respond, she closed the gap between us, her hands finding their way to my face as her lips pressed against mine. The kiss was slow, deliberate, and impossibly intense. It was not hurried like before, it was measured, as if she wanted to savor every moment. I pulled her closer, my hands sliding to her waist. Her sweater was soft under my fingers, but it did little to mask the warmth of her skin beneath. She pressed against me, her body fitting perfectly with mine, and for a moment, the weight of the world disappeared. "You make me feel alive," she whispered against my lips, her breath warm and intoxicating. Her words sent a shiver through me, and I found myself drowning in her, every touch, every kiss pulling me further under. She guided me back toward the bed, her movements confident yet unhurried, as if she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. The storm outside had calmed, but the storm inside that room was only just beginning. Every touch, every movement, was electric, the intensity between us building with every passing second. She let her sweater fall to the floor, revealing the curves I had only imagined earlier. Her skin glowed softly in the moonlight streaming through the window, and I felt my breath hitch as I took her in. But just as the moment reached its peak, the sound of a door creaking open echoed faintly through the house. We both froze. "Elaine?" Alex's voice called, groggy but alarmingly close. Her eyes widened in panic as she scrambled to grab her sweater, hastily wrapping it around herself. She turned to me, her face a mix of fear and regret. "Do not say anything," she whispered, her voice urgent. There was another sound, footsteps moving down the hall. "Mom? Are you up?" Alex's voice came again, closer this time. Elaine moved to the door, her hand on the knob. She glanced back at me, her expression unreadable. "We cannot keep doing this," she said, though her voice lacked the conviction of someone who truly meant it. And then she was gone, slipping out into the hallway and closing the door softly behind her. I stood there in the darkness, my heart pounding, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. The weight of what had just happened, and what could have happened, pressed down on me like a lead blanket. I knew this was spiraling into something dangerous, something that could not end well. But even as guilt clawed at the edges of my mind, I could not shake the pull of her. The way she had looked at me, the way her touch had felt. It was intoxicating, overwhelming, and completely unstoppable. Some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. And I knew deep down that this was far from over. The next morning, the storm had calmed, leaving the world blanketed in a pristine, undisturbed layer of snow. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painting the house in a deceptive warmth. But inside, the tension lingered, thick and heavy, like a storm yet to pass. I sat at the breakfast table with Alex, his cheerful demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in my head. Elaine moved gracefully through the kitchen, her back to us as she poured coffee. She was calm, composed, every movement practiced, but I could feel the electricity in the air every time her gaze briefly flicked in my direction. "So, did you sleep all right?" Alex asked, snapping me out of my thoughts. "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile. "It was good." Alex grinned. "Told you this place was like a vacation spot. Nothing beats the sauna and a night here to reset." I nodded, though my mind was a million miles away. Every time Elaine moved, every time her presence brushed against the edges of my awareness, my heart raced. I could not stop replaying the moments from last night, the feel of her lips, the fire of her touch, and the undeniable pull that neither of us seemed able to resist. "Mom," Alex said suddenly, "thanks for helping Noah with the sauna last night. He said it was amazing." The words hung in the air like a loaded gun. Elaine turned, her expression perfectly neutral, as if the comment meant nothing. "Of course," she said with a soft smile. "I am glad you enjoyed it, Noah." Her tone was casual, almost dismissive, but her eyes lingered on mine for just a second too long. It was a fleeting moment, but it spoke volumes. I quickly looked down at my plate, my chest tightening as the memory of her whispered words from last night replayed in my head. As the morning stretched on, I found myself looking for any excuse to leave the table, to escape the suffocating tension. But Alex was oblivious, launching into plans for the day as though everything was perfectly normal. Elaine remained quiet, her presence commanding even in her silence. When Alex finally suggested we head out to clear the driveway, I seized the opportunity. The cold air outside was bracing, a welcome relief from the stifling weight of the house. We worked in silence for a while, the scrape of shovels against the snow the only sound. "You seem off today," Alex said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "Something on your mind?" I hesitated, my pulse quickening. No, just tired, I guess. He shrugged, seemingly satisfied with my answer. Well, let me know if you want to crash here again tonight. You are always welcome. The offer should have comforted me, but instead, it sent a pang of anxiety through my chest. The thought of spending another night under the same roof as Elaine felt like walking a razor's edge. When we finished, Alex headed back inside, leaving me alone in the crisp winter air. I stood there for a moment, staring at the snow-covered ground, trying to make sense of everything. What had started as an innocent visit had spiraled into something I could not control, something I could not escape. And yet, when I stepped back inside and saw Elaine standing in the hallway, her gaze meeting mine for a fleeting moment, I knew this was far from over. The line between what I wanted and what I knew was right had blurred completely. And deep down, I realized I was not sure I wanted to find it again. The day passed in a blur of forced smiles and stifled tension. Elaine avoided being alone in the same room with me, but the fleeting glances, the brush of her arm as she passed, spoke volumes louder than any words could. Alex remained blissfully unaware, his carefree nature a sharp contrast to the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. By evening, the storm outside was little more than a memory, but inside the house, the storm between Elaine and me raged on, silent but unrelenting. Let us do a movie night, Alex announced, pulling blankets and pillows onto the couch. Classic winter vibes, hot cocoa, popcorn, the works. I nodded absently, my focus elsewhere. Elaine sat across the room, her legs curled beneath her on the armchair. She was dressed casually in a sweater and jeans, but the sight of her was enough to ignite the same fire that had been smoldering since the sauna. As the movie started, the dim light from the screen flickered across her face, and I found it impossible not to steal glances in her direction. She caught me looking once, her eyes locking with mine for a fraction of a second before she turned her attention back to the screen. My heart raced, the unspoken tension suffocating. Halfway through the movie, Alex excused himself, mumbling something about needing to grab his phone charger from upstairs. The second he left, the air in the room shifted. Elaine remained still, her gaze fixed on the screen, but her hands fidgeted slightly in her lap. Elaine, I said quietly, unable to stop myself. She turned to me, her expression guarded but her eyes betraying her. Do not, she whispered, her voice firm but tinged with desperation. We cannot do this here. Her words should have stopped me, but they only fueled the storm inside me. Then why does it feel like you do not want to stop? I asked, my voice barely audible. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, the silence stretched between us, heavy and charged. Then, as if some invisible barrier broke, she stood abruptly, brushing past me as she disappeared down the hall. I hesitated for a moment before following her, the pull between us impossible to ignore. I found her in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, her back to me. Her hands gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. She did not turn as I entered, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. You should not have followed me, she said, her voice low. Then tell me to leave, I replied, stepping closer. Say the words, and I will walk away. She turned then, her eyes meeting mine with a mix of anger and longing. Do you think this is easy for me? She asked, her voice trembling. I know what we are doing is wrong. I know we should stop. But every time I see you. Her words trailed off, and she shook her head as if trying to shake free from the grip of her own emotions. I took another step closer, closing the distance between us. Elaine, I said softly, if you really want me to walk away, just say it. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine as if weighing her options. Then, slowly, she reached for me, her fingers brushing against my arm. I cannot, she whispered, her voice barely audible. And just like that, the dam broke. She pulled me toward her, her lips finding mine in a kiss that was desperate and hungry, filled with all the emotions we had been fighting to suppress. Her hands gripped my shirt, pulling me closer as if trying to erase any space between us. I responded in kind, my hands tangling in her hair as I pressed her against the counter. The world outside ceased to exist, all that mattered was her touch, her warmth, her. The sound of footsteps upstairs brought us back to reality. Elaine pushed me away, her breathing ragged as she straightened her sweater. We have to stop, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. But as she turned to leave, she paused, her hand resting on the doorway. "This has to end," she whispered, more to herself than to me, before disappearing down the hall. I stood there, my chest heaving, my mind a whirlwind. I knew she was right. This had to stop. But deep down, I also knew that stopping was the last thing either of us truly wanted. And in that moment, I realized that the line between desire and destruction was razor thin, and we were dancing dangerously close to the edge. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like something is about to break. Alex had gone out early to help a neighbor clear snow, leaving Elaine and me alone in the house. I told myself I would avoid her, that it was better to let the silence grow until the storm between us dissipated. But I was wrong. I found her in the living room, standing by the window, staring out at the snow-covered yard. The sunlight painted her in soft hues, making her seem almost untouchable, like a painting too delicate to disturb. But she was not untouchable, and we both knew it. "Good morning," she said without turning, her voice calm but distant. "Morning," I replied, my throat dry. I lingered in the doorway, unsure whether to stay or retreat. Part of me wanted to leave, to escape before we crossed another line. But another part, the part that had been pulling me toward her since that first moment in the sauna, refused to move. "Why are you still here, Noah?" she asked suddenly, turning to face me. Her eyes were tired, her expression guarded. "I do not know," I admitted. It was the truth, as much as I hated to say it. "Maybe because I cannot seem to walk away." Her gaze softened, but only for a moment. "You need to," she said, though her voice wavered. "We both need to." I took a step closer, my heart pounding in my chest. "Then why does it feel like neither of us wants that?" Her breath caught, and for a moment, the only sound was the faint creak of the house settling. She shook her head, as if trying to deny the truth of my words, but she did not move away as I crossed the room. "Because it is easier to want something than to fight it," she said softly, her voice trembling. I stopped just in front of her, the space between us charged with everything unsaid. My hand hovered near hers, close enough to feel the warmth of her skin. "Do you want me to leave?" I asked, my voice low. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine. The tension in the room was suffocating, and for a moment, I thought she might push me away, might end this once and for all. But instead, she whispered, "No." The word was barely audible, but it was enough. Enough to shatter the fragile wall we had built between us. Enough to pull us back into the storm we had been fighting to resist. I closed the distance between us, my lips finding hers in a kiss that was as desperate as it was inevitable. Her hands gripped my shirt, pulling me closer, and I let myself get lost in her. Every touch, every kiss was a confession, a surrender to the pull that neither of us could escape. She guided me back toward the couch, her movements slow and deliberate. Her hand slid under my shirt, her touch igniting a fire that burned away every last shred of hesitation. I pulled her closer, my fingers tangling in her hair as the rest of the world faded away. But just as the moment reached its peak, the sound of the front door opening shattered everything. We froze, our breaths ragged, as Alex's voice echoed through the house. "Mom? Noah?" "I am back," he called, his tone light and unsuspecting. Elaine scrambled away from me, her face pale as she adjusted her sweater. "Go," she whispered urgently, her voice barely above a breath. "Now." I stumbled to my feet, my heart pounding as I hurried out of the room, slipping into the hallway just as Alex appeared in the doorway. I leaned against the wall, my mind racing, the weight of what we had just done pressing down on me like a crushing wave. I could hear them talking, their voices muffled but casual, as if nothing had happened. But I knew the truth. What had started as a single moment of weakness had spiraled into something we could no longer control. And as I stood there, hidden in the shadows, I realized that the edge we had been dancing on was gone. We were falling now. The rest of the day was a delicate performance, a balancing act between pretending nothing had happened and avoiding moments that could unravel everything. Alex was in high spirits, oblivious to the tension simmering beneath the surface. Elaine, ever the picture of composure, moved through the house with practiced ease, her every word and gesture flawlessly ordinary. But her eyes betrayed her. Each fleeting glance, each accidental brush of her hand against mine, felt like a confession. And I could not stop myself from looking, from seeking her out in those stolen moments. By the time evening rolled around, Alex was in the kitchen preparing dinner, humming to himself. Elaine stood by the fireplace, tending to the flames. The soft glow of the fire painted her in warm tones, making her seem otherworldly. I joined her, standing a few feet away. The crackle of the fire filled the silence between us. "We need to talk," I said quietly, my voice low enough that Alex would not hear. She did not look at me, her focus on the fire. "There is nothing left to say," she replied, her tone measured. "Do not do that," I said, stepping closer. "Do not pretend this is nothing." She turned then, her eyes sharp. "What do you want me to say, Noah? That I regret it? That it never should have happened? Of course, it should not have. But it did. And now we have to figure out how to move on before this destroys everything." Her words were like a slap, but the fire in her eyes told a different story. She was just as conflicted as I was, just as caught in the pull of something we could not explain. "Can you?" I asked, my voice steady. "Move on?" Her breath caught, and for a moment, the mask slipped. Her shoulders sagged slightly, her eyes softening. "I do not know," she admitted, her voice barely audible. Before either of us could say more, Alex's voice called from the kitchen. "Dinner is ready." Elaine turned away quickly, her composure snapping back into place. "We cannot keep doing this," she said, her voice firmer now. "It has to stop." And just like that, the moment was gone. She walked away, leaving me standing there, the heat of the fire doing little to thaw the chill settling over me. Dinner was a blur. Alex talked animatedly about plans for the weekend, his words a steady hum I could barely register. Elaine was quiet, offering the occasional comment or nod, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped her utensils just a little too tightly. I excused myself as soon as I could, retreating to the guest room under the pretense of being tired. But sleep was impossible. My mind raced with memories of her, the weight of her words, the undeniable truth that neither of us seemed capable of stopping what was happening. Hours passed in restless silence. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of wood or the faint whistle of wind against the windows. I was just beginning to drift into a fitful sleep when a soft knock at the door pulled me back. I sat up, my heart pounding. I knew who it was before I even opened the door. Elaine stood there, her expression conflicted, her hands trembling slightly. "We cannot keep doing this," she said again, but this time, her voice cracked. "Then why are you here?" I asked, my voice quiet but steady. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine. "Because I cannot stay away," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I stepped aside, letting her in. She closed the door behind her, and for a moment, we just stood there, the silence between us heavier than ever. "This is the last time," she said, though even as the words left her mouth, I could see the doubt in her eyes. I nodded, knowing it was a lie we both wanted to believe. She crossed the room slowly, and when she reached me, she hesitated for only a second before pulling me into a kiss that was filled with equal parts desperation and inevitability. We both knew it could not last. But in that moment, none of that mattered. The kiss deepened quickly, fueled by the weight of everything we had been holding back. Elaine's hands gripped my shirt, pulling me closer as if trying to erase any distance between us. I let myself get lost in her, in the feeling of her lips, her touch, the undeniable pull that had brought us to this moment. But even as we gave in, the reality of what we were doing loomed large, a shadow we could not escape. The sound of the house settling, the faint whistle of the wind outside, it all felt too loud, too close. And yet, neither of us stopped. "This has to end," Elaine whispered against my lips, but her actions betrayed her words. Her hand slid to the back of my neck, her touch warm and unrelenting. "It cannot go any further." "Then why are you still here?" I asked, my voice low, almost a challenge. She froze for a moment, her gaze meeting mine. The flicker of doubt, of guilt, crossed her face, but it was fleeting. "Because I am weak," she admitted, her voice breaking. "And you?" The words hung in the air, unfinished, but I understood. I felt it too, the magnetic pull that neither of us seemed able to resist. Before either of us could say anything else, the faint sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. My heart stopped. We both froze, the tension in the room shifting from charged to panicked. "Mom? You awake?" Alex's voice called out, groggy but close, too close. Elaine's eyes widened, and she stepped back quickly, her hands trembling as she straightened her sweater. "Go," she mouthed silently, motioning toward the bathroom. I barely had time to move before Alex's knock came at the door. Elaine stepped toward it, composing herself with a speed that left me in awe. When she opened it, her tone was casual, calm, as if nothing had happened. "Alex," she said softly. "What are you doing up?" "I thought I heard something," he said, his voice thick with sleep. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she replied, her voice steady. "I could not sleep, so I came to check on Noah. He seemed off earlier, and I wanted to make sure he was okay." Alex's footsteps shifted, and I knew he was looking past her, scanning the room. My heart pounded as I pressed myself against the cold tile of the bathroom wall, praying he would not come in. "Everything good?" Alex asked. "Yes," Elaine said, her voice firm. "Go back to bed, Alex. It is late." There was a pause, and for a moment, I thought he might push the issue. But then his footsteps retreated, the sound growing fainter until the house fell silent again. Elaine closed the door softly, her shoulders sagging as the tension drained from her. She turned to me, her expression a mix of relief and something else, something deeper, more conflicted. "This is it," she said firmly, her voice trembling but resolute. "It has to be. I cannot risk him finding out." I nodded, though my chest felt heavy with the weight of her words. "I understand," I said, though the words felt hollow. "It should never have happened in the first place." She hesitated, her eyes searching mine. "No," she said softly, "it should not have." But it did. The silence that followed was deafening. We both knew this was the breaking point, the moment where everything either stopped or spiraled out of control. And yet, even as she turned to leave, even as I watched her walk out the door, I knew this was not the end. Some storms are impossible to escape. And we were still standing in the eye of it, waiting for the next wave to hit. The following days were a blur of avoidance and pretense. Elaine and I rarely found ourselves alone, and when we did, we barely spoke. Alex remained oblivious, his easygoing demeanor making the tension between us even harder to bear. But the silence did not erase what had happened. If anything, it amplified it. Every glance Elaine and I exchanged felt heavier, every accidental touch like an explosion. The house had become a battleground, each of us fighting a war we could not win. It was late one evening when the dam finally broke. Alex had gone out to meet friends, leaving Elaine and me alone. The house was quiet, the weight of unspoken words pressing down like a physical force. I stayed in the guest room, telling myself I would not seek her out, that I would not let the pull between us win. But she came to me. The knock at my door was soft, hesitant. I opened it to find her standing there, her face pale, her eyes filled with something I could not quite name: fear, regret, desire. "We need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I stepped aside, letting her in. She moved to the center of the room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as if trying to hold herself together. "This cannot go on," she began, her voice trembling. "We keep saying it, but we do not stop. And if Alex finds out..." Her voice broke, and she looked away. I nodded, though my chest tightened at the thought of her walking away for good. "I know," I said. "But every time I try, I cannot," she finished, meeting my gaze. "Neither can I." The admission hung between us, raw and unguarded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The tension in the room was suffocating, the pull between us stronger than ever. "You need to leave," she said finally, though her voice lacked conviction. "You need to go before this gets worse." I took a step closer, unable to stop myself. "Do you really believe that?" I asked, my voice low. Her breath hitched, and she shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. "No," she whispered. "But that does not mean it is not true. The space between us seemed to shrink on its own. I reached for her hand, and she let me, her fingers trembling as they intertwined with mine. "Elaine," I began, my voice soft, "if you want me to leave, say it. Tell me, and I will go." She stared at me, her eyes searching mine. "I do not know how to," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I do not want to." I pulled her into my arms, and she came willingly, her head resting against my chest as her body trembled. For a moment, we just stood there, holding on to each other as if the world might crumble around us. And then she kissed me. It was not like before. This kiss was different, slower, more deliberate. It was not fueled by desperation or urgency, but by something deeper, something neither of us could deny. Her hand slid to the back of my neck, pulling me closer as I let myself get lost in her. But just as the moment deepened, the sound of a car door slamming outside snapped us back to reality. Elaine froze, her eyes wide with panic. "He is home," she whispered, pulling away quickly. We scrambled, her smoothing her clothes, me straightening the room as if it might erase the evidence of what had just happened. The front door opened, and Alex's voice called out cheerfully. "Hey! I am back." Elaine turned to me, her expression one of sheer panic. "This has to stop," she whispered, her voice urgent. "For real this time." She left the room, her footsteps quick and quiet as she disappeared down the hall. I sat on the edge of the bed, my heart racing, my mind a storm of emotions. She was right. This had to stop. But deep down, I knew the truth. We had already gone too far. The days that followed were a tense dance of avoidance and near misses. Elaine and I kept our distance, each interaction calculated, each glance restrained. But no amount of pretense could erase what had happened, nor could it ease the growing weight of guilt and desire that consumed us both. Alex remained blissfully unaware, and his presence acted as a fragile buffer. But the moments when he left the room, when the house fell quiet and Elaine and I were left with nothing but the silence between us, were unbearable. The tension was palpable, thick, and suffocating. It all came crashing down one evening. Alex had gone upstairs to shower, leaving Elaine and me in the kitchen. The air between us was heavy, the kind of silence that begged to be broken. She stood by the sink, her back to me, her hands trembling slightly as she rinsed a glass. "You are shaking," I said softly, unable to stop myself from breaking the silence. She turned, her expression conflicted. "Do not," she whispered, her voice filled with warning. "We cannot keep doing this." "I know," I said, though the words felt hollow. "But pretending it did not happen is not working either." She set the glass down, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "You think I do not know that?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Every time I close my eyes, it is there. You are there." I stepped closer, unable to stop myself. "Elaine." "Stop," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "If Alex." The sound of footsteps descending the stairs cut her off. We both froze as Alex entered the kitchen, his hair damp from the shower, a towel slung over his shoulder. "Hey," he said, oblivious to the tension in the room. "What are you two up to?" Elaine forced a smile, her composure snapping back into place. "Just cleaning up," she said, her voice steady. "How was your shower?" "Perfect," Alex said with a grin. He turned to me. "Noah, you up for a game? I found the old console in the basement." "Sure," I said, my voice tight. As Alex led me into the living room, Elaine stayed behind, her face pale, her hands still gripping the counter. I glanced back at her, and for a moment, our eyes met. There was something unspoken in her gaze, something raw and desperate. I knew this was not over. Later that night, long after Alex had gone to bed, I found myself restless, unable to sleep. The house was quiet, the only sound the faint creak of wood settling in the cold. A soft knock at my door broke the silence. I opened it to find Elaine standing there, her expression torn. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. I stepped aside, letting her in. She closed the door behind her, her hands fidgeting as she turned to face me. "This has to stop," she said, her voice firm but shaky. "We cannot keep risking everything like this." I know, I said, though the pull between us was as strong as ever. But what do you want me to do? Leave? Pretend I do not feel this? Her breath hitched, and she shook her head. I do not know, she admitted. But we cannot keep pretending this is not happening. I stepped closer, the distance between us shrinking. Elaine, if you want me to leave, say it. Tell me, and I will walk away. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine. I cannot, she whispered, her voice breaking. I do not want you to. And just like that, the fragile wall we had built between us crumbled. She stepped into my arms, her lips finding mine in a kiss that was slow and deliberate, filled with all the emotions we had been holding back. But even as I held her, even as I lost myself in her, I knew the storm was far from over. Some secrets are too heavy to keep. And this one was about to break. Elaine pulled away suddenly, her breathing ragged. Her hands trembled as she gripped my arms, her eyes wide with panic. Noah, this has to be the last time, she whispered, her voice cracking. We are running out of space to hide. I nodded, though my heart pounded with the weight of her words. I know, I said, my voice low. But can you really walk away from this? From us? Her expression softened for a moment, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through her fear. I do not know, she admitted, her voice barely audible. But we do not have a choice. The sound of movement upstairs froze us both. Elaine stepped back, her face pale, her eyes darting toward the door. I need to go, she said quickly, her voice trembling. She left without another word, slipping out into the hallway as quietly as she had come. I stood there in the silence, my chest tight, my mind racing. This had to end, and yet, every time I thought about walking away, it felt impossible. The next day, Alex suggested a hike. The storm had passed, leaving the landscape blanketed in snow, the air crisp and clear. Elaine agreed quickly, her tone overly bright, as if trying to compensate for the tension that still lingered. I went along, though every step felt heavy, the weight of the past week pressing down on me. We trudged through the snow, Alex leading the way, chatting animatedly about his plans for the new year. Elaine followed, her laughter forced, her movements stiff. At one point, Alex wandered ahead, leaving Elaine and me alone on the trail. The silence between us was deafening, the tension almost unbearable. This cannot keep happening, she said finally, her voice low but firm. I know, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. But what do you want me to do? Pretend it never happened? She stopped walking, turning to face me. We have to, she said, her eyes filled with desperation. For Alex. For everything. Her words hit like a punch to the chest, but before I could respond, Alex called out from up ahead. Hey, you two coming or what? Elaine forced a smile, nodding quickly before continuing down the trail. I followed, my mind a storm of emotions. That night, the tension reached its breaking point. Alex had gone to bed early, leaving the house quiet. I sat in the guest room, the weight of everything pressing down on me like a crushing wave. The door opened without warning, and Elaine stepped inside, closing it quickly behind her. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. Noah, she began, her voice shaking. I cannot do this anymore. I stood, my chest tightening. Elaine. No, she interrupted, her voice firm. You do not understand. I cannot keep lying to him. I cannot keep lying to myself. The weight of her words hit me like a tidal wave. I stepped closer, my heart racing. What are you saying? She hesitated, tears welling in her eyes. I am saying we are going to get caught. If we do not stop now, everything will fall apart. Her voice cracked, and she looked away, her hands gripping the edge of the dresser for support. But stopping does not change what happened, I said quietly. It does not change how we feel. She let out a shaky breath, her shoulders sagging. No, it does not, she admitted, her voice barely audible. But it is the only way to protect him. Her words hung in the air, heavy and final. I nodded, though the thought of walking away felt like tearing something vital out of my chest. If that is what you want, I said softly, I will go. She looked at me then, her eyes filled with a mix of pain and longing. "It is not what I want," she said, her voice breaking. "But it is what has to happen." We stood there in silence, the weight of our decision settling over us like a shroud. And for the first time, I realized just how impossible it would be to untangle myself from her, from us. Some choices change everything. And this one would leave scars. Elaine left the room, her footsteps soft but deliberate as they disappeared down the hall. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the closed door, the silence around me deafening. Her words echoed in my mind, "It is what has to happen." But the space she left behind felt unbearable, like an open wound that refused to heal. I knew she was right, knew that continuing down this path would only lead to disaster, but the pull I felt toward her was stronger than logic, stronger than the fear of consequences. The next morning, I made my decision. It was time to leave. I packed my things in silence, the weight of the past week pressing down on me with every movement. Alex knocked on the door as I zipped up my bag, his grin as bright as ever. "Heading out already?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "I have got some things to take care of back home." He nodded, oblivious to the turmoil beneath the surface. "Well, it was great having you here, man. You are welcome anytime." I hesitated, the weight of unspoken truths threatening to crush me. "Thanks," I said finally. "Take care of yourself." As I stepped into the hallway, Elaine appeared at the other end. Her eyes met mine briefly before she turned away, busying herself with a stack of folded laundry. The sight of her, so close yet so unreachable, sent a pang through my chest. I said my goodbyes quickly, avoiding lingering too long. Alex walked me to the door, waving as I stepped out into the cold. The fresh snow crunched underfoot as I made my way to my car, the house growing smaller in the rearview mirror. Days passed, but the memories refused to fade. I went through the motions of daily life, but Elaine was always there, in every quiet moment, in every fleeting thought. I replayed our moments together over and over, the weight of what we had done gnawing at me. And then, late one night, my phone buzzed. The message was from Elaine. 4 words, simple yet heavy: "We need to talk." My heart raced as I stared at the screen, the pull of her words undeniable. I knew responding would drag me back into the storm we had tried to escape, but I also knew I could not ignore her. "When and where?" I replied, my hands trembling. Her response came quickly. "Tomorrow. My place. Alex will be out." The next day, I arrived at her house, my heart pounding as I knocked on the door. Elaine opened it almost immediately, her expression guarded, her eyes filled with something I could not quite place: fear, longing, regret. She stepped aside, letting me in. The house was quiet, the air thick with unspoken tension. She motioned for me to sit in the living room, but neither of us spoke as we settled into the awkward silence. Finally, she broke it. "Noah," she began, her voice trembling. "I cannot do this anymore. I thought I could just push it all away, but I cannot." I nodded, though the knot in my chest tightened. "Neither can I." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the coffee table. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I waited, the silence stretching unbearably. "This is bigger than us," she continued, her voice cracking. "Bigger than what we want or feel. If Alex finds out." She trailed off, shaking her head as if she could not bear to finish the thought. I leaned closer, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "What do you want from me, Elaine?" She looked at me then, her expression raw and unguarded. "I do not know," she admitted. "But I cannot let this go. And I cannot keep it hidden anymore." Her words hit me like a freight train, the implications clear and terrifying. We had crossed a line, one that could not be erased, and now we were standing on the edge of a precipice. "You mean you want to tell him?" I said, my voice low. She nodded, her tears finally spilling over. "I do not see another way." I leaned back, the weight of her words sinking in. The storm we had been trying to escape had finally caught up to us, and there was no way to outrun it anymore. Some choices cannot be undone. And this one would change everything. Elaine's words hung in the air like a thunderclap, each syllable reverberating through me. She wanted to tell Alex. The one person whose trust and love she had always claimed to cherish above all else. And yet, here we were, teetering on the edge of disaster. "You cannot be serious," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know what this will do to him? To you? To us?" Elaine buried her face in her hands, her body trembling as she fought back sobs. "I know," she choked out, her voice raw. "But I cannot live like this anymore. The lies, the guilt, it is eating me alive, Noah." I paced the room, my mind racing. "There has to be another way," I said, though the desperation in my voice betrayed the hollowness of my suggestion. "If you tell him, there is no coming back from this." She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face etched with pain. "There is already no coming back," she said softly. "We crossed that line the moment we let this happen." I froze, her words cutting through me like a blade. She was right, of course. We had crossed a line, one that could never be undone. And now, the consequences were barreling toward us, unstoppable and inevitable. "What are you going to say?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my attempt to stay composed. "I do not know," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "But he deserves the truth. Even if it destroys everything." The hours that followed felt like an eternity. Elaine asked me to leave before Alex returned, but I could not bring myself to go far. I parked down the street, the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on me like a physical force. From the car, I watched as Alex pulled into the driveway, his usual carefree demeanor evident even from a distance. He disappeared inside, oblivious to the storm brewing within those walls. I could not stay away. The need to know what would happen, to see how it all unraveled, was too strong. I stepped out of the car and crept closer, the soft glow of the house's windows pulling me in like a moth to a flame. Inside, voices rose and fell, muffled but unmistakable. Alex's voice, confused and growing more agitated. Elaine's, trembling and barely steady. Then came the silence. Long, heavy, suffocating. And then, Alex's voice broke through. "What do you mean, Mom? What are you saying?" I leaned against the cold siding of the house, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The next words hit like a lightning strike. "It happened, Alex," Elaine said, her voice cracking. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake." I heard Alex's sharp intake of breath, the sound of something, maybe a glass, shattering against the floor. "With Noah," he demanded, his voice raw with disbelief and betrayal. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by Elaine's quiet sobs. "You are kidding me," Alex said, his voice rising. "Please tell me this is some kind of sick joke." "I am sorry," Elaine cried. "I never wanted this to happen. I cannot explain it, but I am so sorry." The sound of footsteps, quick, heavy, echoed, and I knew Alex was heading for the door. I barely had time to step back before it flew open, slamming against the wall as Alex stormed out. His eyes met mine, and in that moment, the betrayal and rage in his expression froze me in place. "You," he said, his voice shaking with fury. "How could you?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. What could I say? There was no excuse, no justification. Alex took a step toward me, his fists clenched. "You were my best friend," he spat. "How could you do this to me? To her? To us?" "I am sorry," I managed, my voice weak and hollow. "Sorry," he shouted. "You think that fixes this? You think that erases what you did?" Elaine appeared in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes red. "Alex," she began, her voice trembling. "Do not," he snapped, his glare cutting her off. "You have said enough." He turned back to me, his jaw tight, his breathing ragged. "Get out," he said, his voice low and cold. "I never want to see you again." I nodded, my chest tight, the weight of his words crushing me. Without another word, I turned and walked away, each step feeling heavier than the last. As I drove away, the reality of what had just happened sank in. The storm we had created had finally broken, leaving destruction in its wake. And as much as I wanted to believe time would heal the wounds we had inflicted, I knew some scars never fade. Some choices cannot be undone. And this one had shattered everything.